Okay, we are on the GamesCom 2024, and now with me is
Ben Fisher.
And together we are going to have a look at the game ATOMFALL. What can we do here?
ATOMFALL is a survival action game set in 1950s north of England in a quarantine zone surrounding a nuclear disaster. So the player wakes up in this environment and is trying to understand what's happened and trying to survive.
Great, let's jump in.
So in this demo, we're skipping ahead about an hour into the play experience, so missing the early story, early tutorials, and what we'll see here is the start of the first sandbox environment that the player can explore. In the full game, the player can explore between multiple sandboxes right from the start of the game. They're not locked in or forced through a certain path through the game, and we just let them explore freely wherever they want to go.
Okay, so the game is actually based on historic events. That is the Wind-scale nuclear fire that happened in 1957, an accident happening in a plant that was supposed to generate fuel for nuclear bombs. Mostly covered up at this time by the UK government, and it's now we are in an alternate timeline where things have gone much more wrong than in the actual historic event. How did you get to the idea to make this game?
Well, the original idea came from Jason Kingsley, who's one of the founders and owners of Rebellion, and his observation was that there are lots of games set in these kind of nuclear disaster zones with people trying to survive something a little bit distorting and otherworldly, but there weren't any based around the first major nuclear disaster in the world, which was the Wind-scale fire. So he asked the question, what would that sort of game look like? What would it look like if Rebellion made a kind of RPG-ish game based around that setup? So Rebellion games are often quite pulpy and quite British, so it seemed like a perfect fit.
Now we have a telephone ringing that reminds of Matrix. There was also this theme. Is this happenstance, or did you think something about that?
Well, actually this came from something that really happened to Jason when he was walking in the hills in this sort of area and walked past a phone which happened to ring on his way past. That idea stuck with him, and then we put it in the game as a kind of mystery to start the player exploring. We don't have a traditional quest system in the game, instead we have leads, so the player uncovers information as they explore. They choose what information to trust, they choose what information to follow to help them understand what's happened in this disaster. So what you hear is a ringing phone and a mystery voice, which does have the same sort of feeling as something like the Matrix. But it actually comes from a real event that happened.
Okay, now that sounds somewhat mysterious.
Yeah, that's absolutely the idea. So I'll bring up the journal here. I've just heard a voice say Oberon must die, and I don't know who the voice is. I don't know what Oberon means. And players can walk past the phone box and not engage with it at all, and choose to just explore by themselves or find different leads. Part of the mystery of the game is trying to understand who the voice is, what Oberon means, whether you can trust them, whether that's important to the overall story of the Wind-scale plant. And we leave this entirely open to the player, so there's not a golden path. There's not a traditional quest system. There's just leads that are connected to different kinds of information as you explore.
Now what we are going to do next after we... Do we actually have any kind of backstory for our character, or are we just plunged into this world with nothing at all?
Well, it's a mystery. That's part of this mystery that you're trying to uncover as well. In the main game, you wake up inside a bunker with a scientist in a hazmat suit who's bleeding from some kind of wound, who knows that they don't have long to live, and they have some information that they want to share with you so you can try and help. And it's up to you if you want to help or not. So part of the story is you don't know who you are. You don't know who the mystery voice is. We've intentionally given the player no clues of their age, race, or gender, so that players can put themselves into the game world, but also so that that adds to the mystery.
The first couple of people that we meet here. Let's see what we can learn. Oh, he seems to be delighted. I hope we don't hear the sound in the moment, unfortunately. I hope he sounds delighted.
He is, he's cheerful and friendly.
Where did you come from, eh? Say, You do look a little worse for wear. You look on your side not getting snatched by something foul while you were dozing. Listen, if you don't mind me saying, you don't look much like a local. You didn't walk in from, well, from the outside.
So, as you can see from the conversation system here, we've tried to make it work more like real conversations. A lot of RPGs have a system where you work down a list of topics and they grey out when you've talked to somebody. We wanted to try something different because we wanted the player to feel the sense of consequences to their actions. So conversations work more like a real conversation. You can choose between different tones of voice and what you say, and then depending on the person, they might open up or close down based on that tone. Because you're exploring and trying to learn about the game world, you might close off leads by accident, or you might talk to someone in a way that encourages them to tell you a little bit more. So it's up to the player if they want to, try and convince people to help, or if they just want to say, you ask a lot of questions and stop talking to them.
Do the characters memorize your choices past a single conversation?
Yes, yeah. So you can't go back and have the same conversation because you can't do that in real life. Once you've talked to someone, if you've got a reason to come back and talk to them again, if they ask for help and you provide them that help, then you go back and the conversation has moved on. Yeah. We don't highlight it with a UI element or anything like that because there are so many layers in the game where you are influencing your path through the game. There are so many places where you're choosing your options of how to explore and where to explore that we thought it was more natural to just let you put yourself into the game world and just explore as you feel like you would.
One thing we have just learned with these outside is that we are somewhere inside. If we read the description of the game, we know that's due to a quarantine zone due to the nuclear disaster, and that means also the catastrophe is not global.
That's part of the mystery. All you know is that you wake up inside a quarantine zone. So you can explore and discover what's inside the quarantine zone, but there's an interference field that means that transmissions can't get in or out, so you have no idea of what's happening outside the quarantine zone. However, as you explore, different characters might say to you that they can help you find a way to escape, and that way to escape is usually something they offer in exchange for you uncovering the mystery in the Windscale plant and doing something for them when you get there.
So the strange glow we see in the distance is probably the Windscale plant, and yeah, I suppose that's quite a hint on where we are going or what we are going to investigate or what's our eventual target to investigate. So I suppose it will be quite dangerous to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted you to have this clear landmark so that as you explore through the game world, you can always see it's right there and see how close you are. There's no easy route to get there because it's across a lake. As I head in this direction, we might come across a village where people are trying to live their normal life right in front of this major disaster. As you explore through the game, you find a route to get into the Windscale plant and get right to the heart of the disaster.
So, of course, it's not the first time we have set games in an atmosphere of nuclear disaster, the most famous one being Fallout. How does it relate?
Well, we've had many different games have influenced ATOMFALL because we've been trying to do something new, a little bit different. So of the Fallout games, I would say that maybe Fallout New Vegas is the most direct reference point because it's one large interconnected story with interesting characters, all of whom can die, and we've taken the same sort of approach here. There's also influences from Stalker, from Metro, as well as dozens of other games.
So we've just taken out an outlaw. How did we know it's an outlaw?
Well, he had scary, threatening face paint. I sneaked up because I know he's an outlaw because I'm making the game. But if he noticed me, he would turn and shout at me to back off. If I get too close, a fight will kick off. But the combat is optional. It's up to the player if they want to back off and avoid engaging, or if they want to push ahead and fight. When there are large groups of enemies, you're more likely to die than survive, so the combat is very intense. It's messy. You'll probably take a couple of hits while you get into a fight. If you're taking on 1 or 2 enemies, you'll probably do okay. If you're taking on 5 or 6, you need an excellent plan to be able to survive. The bandits are a group that look like they're ready for a fight as soon as you meet them at the start of the game. But there are different factions through the game, and some of them are friendlier or more hostile than others. As you push into the story, that might change.
Could we actually run from any individual battle? So could we complete the game without fighting?
Yes, you can play through the game and kill no one if you wanted to. Or you can play through the game and kill everyone. So the guy that we talked to up the hill, you can kill him, and that just means that you can't follow his leads, and if he would offer other help, you can't offer that help because he's dead. Fight this guy.
Get away,
Uh-oh, that guy's got a gun. So I'm going to run for it and try and find somewhere safe to hide. They're throwing explosives as well. That'll take a lot of damage very quickly. But similarly, if I make an explosive, then they'll get taken out very quickly. Let's see if I can get in here. Yes, I can.
So obviously the world is not a very friendly place. There's a lot of bad people who want to harm us, but are there also friendly people? Well, one friendly person we already met, but like in a general sense of how do they, what are the relations?
Yeah, so there's a mix everywhere. There are, in this area here, you can see bandits who are trying to scavenge for materials. They're trying to survive just like anyone else, but they're being more aggressive about it. But there are things like traders, characters that will give you leads if you help them out for whatever they're interested in. So there's a mix. There's named characters that help push the story forward. There are named characters that will help you try and escape. As well as being hostile characters like this, which are just trying to take what you found to help themselves survive. As you can see, resources are very limited. So this rifle, I've got 1 ammo for that, and this revolver here, I've got 5 total. So I've got to be very, very smart about what fights I get into. And like I say, you can avoid fights or you can back off from fights. And it's all up to the player which route they want to take, and it's all optional.
The gun does not look very safe, judging by the rust.
No, definitely not. So they've been trapped in this quarantine zone for 5 years, so everything is falling apart. Oh, you can see him backing off there.
Oh, that does happen, that people run from us as well, they give up.
Yes, exactly. So he saw I had a gun and he didn't have a ranged weapon, so he tried to back off. And run towards his friends, one of whom has a ranged weapon, so they try and find a friend that can help them survive. Yeah, so there's a group here of... Uh-oh, I'm surrounded. Yeah, so there's a group of 5 or 6 enemies there, so I'm lucky that I survived that. I'm just going to run for it. But yeah, I can point my gun and they'll back off. They take a long time to decide to get into a fight with the player, so it's up to you whether you get into that fight or not. So we wanted to make sure that there's lots of options when you get into an encounter. Enemy patrols are slightly procedural, slightly random, so I can just be patient and wait for these guys to move on if I prefer. They think they've lost sight of me over in that direction, so I can wait for them to move on and then go and scavenge where they're exploring, or I can try and take them out. But resources are limited, so you might use up what you've got to get into that fight. So I think I found somewhere safe to hide through here.
A big door, a big stable door. I was thinking about, is it door to the outside? Obviously not. Door to a protected area. Door to a place where people are friendly, or maybe just not.
Yeah, it's where they are friendlier for now. Like you see here, this is a sort of military checkpoint. This guy here is pointing a gun at me, but he's showing that he's not an immediate threat. I can walk past if I want, or I can talk to him.
What are you gawping at? Like I said, you're free to enter the village. Move on. Just like that. Captain's orders. He says any stranger might be important, so we just send any like you his way. Unless you're an outlaw, of course. Or worse. I reckon he'd be keen to see
I
you
wonder
right
how
away.
they keep the people
Last I
apart
heard,
from
Captain Sims
the
was down
outlaws
the
and not
bandstand.
outlaws.
Send yourself to him. Too
Well,
sweet.
these guys
Well,
are
it's good
called
for you.
Protocol, and their job was to set up the quarantine zone when the
should
disaster
not.
happened
Do
in
they
the
look
first
like
place.
an outlaw
So they
to
see
you?
themselves as being officially in
There we
charge
go
of the
then.
situation, as being
Outlaws we
representatives of
shoot,
the government.
strangers we
They
let
can't
in.
communicate with the outside
Captain's orders.
either. So there's no guarantee that that's true, but they were the army when this situation started, but they've been here for 5 years surviving like everyone else. This influence is making everyone a little bit different than they were when the whole situation started. So it's up to the player to decide if they think they are trustworthy or not.
How much is it fantasy or possibly even realistic? I mean, are there things happening from like creatures coming up, which would be highly unlikely due to radiation or anything like this? It would be more fantasy, or did you actually try to make it scientifically plausible?
Well, in the storytelling style of the 1950s, 1960s, it was very fashionable at the time to have a story that feels fantastical or mystical to some degree, and then find a reasonable scientific explanation for it. Obviously, it's made up sort of sci-fi sort of thing, but that was the storytelling style of the time. So we've taken the same approach, that there are elements which are exaggerated and sci-fi, and there are things which might seem like otherworldly and mystical as you explore, but part of the story is piecing it together and understanding what's happened.
How long would you do you think you're going to need to play the actual game, not just the demo, but the full game?
We've seen people do playthroughs from one end of the game to the other in about 20 to 30 hours. But like I say, there are multiple routes through the entire game, and you can play it in very, very different ways, so it's great for replay as well. Whichever different characters you decide to trust, whichever different routes you decide to take through the game, you'll get a very, very different experience.
So here we see an element which is more sci-fi-like. It's unlikely that they would have been able to build something like this in the 1950s.
Yes, I mean, what makes this alternate history is, in the real world, like you said, the nuclear plant was making plutonium for bombs, and the cover story was that it was a power plant. In our fiction, the plant is placed in a slightly different location to do a slightly different secret project, and it's a science park where they're trying new experimental technologies. So this is one of these new experimental technologies. It's the BARD is the British Atomic Research Division, and you can see this robot has an atomic battery on its back, and the Protocol have been using these as guard robots to help them enforce the peace, because they found this equipment in some of the bunkers nearby. But as the player explores, they'll be able to piece together that information themselves and understand how this all came to be.
So in the real world, the wind scale disaster was an accident, and now I wonder whether we might find out that here it was actually not an accident.
I'm not going to spoil the story. That's part of the exploration for sure. And in some elements of the story, we place the clues and then ask the player to decide what they really think happened and who to trust. Different people have different perspectives and different judgments about how they feel about what happened. That's part of the fun of the game and part of the fun of the exploration.
Now we're just hearing a loudspeaker announcement, and they say that certain activities are banned and are talking about pagan things, so about something religion, if I'm understanding that correctly. What is actually banned here?
Well, in British culture, there is a kind of long tradition of mixing traditional beliefs with modern society, and one of the influences in our world building was folk horror, where there's a conflict between civilization and urban society against traditional rural society, and we've used that as one of our storytelling elements in ATOMFALL. So in order to survive, some of the people have left the village and to avoid military control, and have become part of a kind of pagan cult, where they appear to be worshipping the forest, worshipping the disaster. And it's up to the player to decide how true they think their perspective is, and whether they can be trusted or not.
Okay, we just got a warning that there's 1 minute left. I suppose that's the demo limitation for Gamescom. And this means that we are also getting to an end of this interview. Very interesting atmosphere, something completely different, as most of the games we know usually play in the United States, and we see that the United Kingdom is quite a bit different. I wonder how this plays out in cultural aspects. That not just the visual is different, but also the people is different. Probably everything more British?
Absolutely. So not only are the visuals and the kind of history that influence the locations more British, but also the tone of the game. The tone of the game came from what we felt like the way that a disaster like this would play out. So people are trying to just live their normal lives and get on with things. There aren't as many guns because it's rural Britain, so you're mixing melee and ranged combat. It feels more like a pub brawl than it does a war zone. And it starts off much lower paced and more story driven, and it's up to the player how hard they push into the disaster and into combat.
So if we are completely cut off from the outside world, we may also have a shortage of ammunition for like firearms, because probably we cannot manufacture them there, and they will only be available as long as there are some reserves left.
Exactly, yeah. So the player can craft things like Molotov cocktails or handmade grenades, which aren't great compared to real military grenades. They can scavenge and search for materials that people have hidden in places like bunkers. If they can get into somewhere that someone else hasn't already pillaged, they'll find survival materials. And also, we encourage the player to observe the game world and make smart reasons about why they might find materials. So the military force will have ammo supplies. So if you can sneak in there, then you can find a large supply of ammunition, but it's going to be very risky. And also there are things like a metal detector, which lets you search the ground for places that people have buried caches of resources. So yeah, what we've done is we've made sure that this enclosed environment encourages the player to observe, make smart reasons, and piece together their own understanding of the game world to survive.
When are you aiming for release?
March 2025.
Okay, that's not too long ago. Then I'm at the end also with my questions, in case we haven't missed anything that you think should be mentioned in such an interview.
It's releasing on all major platforms and day one on Game Pass.
Very good. Then thank you very much for your time, and maybe publish everything we've just recorded, the interview and the gameplay.
Perfect, yeah.
Thank you.